There are certain lines in movies that we would call iconic. They have become part of our vocabulary, part of our culture. Things like, well, let's see. Let's see if you can guess them. I'll begin them, you finish them. Clint Eastwood said, make. In The Godfather said, I made him an offer. Yeah, you guys are good. Okay, now a little bit more difficult, but I think the funniest line in any movie ever. When Harry met Sally in the diner, and I don't even have to finish, right? I'll have. You remember that scene, huh? Okay. Now, the last, and maybe the most famous, it's Apollo 13. Houston, we have a problem. Well, last month, CNN did a 1-hour special on anti-Semitism in America. Now, it left out certain things it shouldn't have. It focused on things that were more political than anti-Semitism, but it was an important piece, and a good part of it was very well done, enlightening, and extremely concerning. My intention is not to critique it. My point is that when CNN comes to the conclusion that anti-Semitism in America has grown so much that they need to devote an entire hour of prime time, then, well, New York, Los Angeles, Miami, Chicago, Cleveland, wherever we have Jewish communities, yes, Houston, we have a problem. I want to make a personal distinction, which may or not be true. I think it's true. I don't believe there is more anti-Semitism than in the past decades. What I think is happening is that more anti-Semites are willing to express their anti-Semitic, anti-Israel views than before. After the world learned about what the Holocaust actually was and what anti-Semitism had led to, expressing anti-Semitism was culturally and societally just not acceptable. So the anti-Semites went back into their proverbial holes in the wall, but now they're coming out. They're coming out of the woodwork, and they feel much freer to either express their hatred or actually act upon it. We're also experiencing different ways that anti-Semitism expresses itself. The rise of social media, for example, gives people and groups the opportunity to express their hatred in a protected cocoon, in a way that they almost feel anonymous, and it allows them to recruit sympathizers. Attacking Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state by calling for BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions in order to try and destroy Israel's economic viability is presented by people who claim vociferously that they're not anti-Semitic. They're just anti the Jewish state. It would be like saying, I think the United States of America and its Constitution should be dismantled, for the American nation has no legitimate right to exist, but I'm not anti-American. Well, actually, you are. Because to deny a people its sovereign nation, to deny its right to exist, is anti-whatever nation that is, period. So we are nervous about this rise in anti-Semitism, and it's reflected in the enormous changes in security at all our Jewish institutions, our synagogues, our federations, our day schools, our JCCs. We have guards. You need picture IDs. Sometimes metal detectors, fences everywhere. That's the clearest proof that things have dramatically changed for the American Jewish community, because none of us of my generation ever experienced that while growing up. My synagogue never had a security budget, I can assure you. And my synagogue in my teen years was this place called Beth Torah over on 163rd Street. The Hebrew High School was housed in that educational building. So I came to Hebrew High School. I studied. I went home. No guards, no fences, no gates, no problems. But lest we think it's a new feeling, let's get some real perspective. Our rituals reflect, in many ways, our historical circumstance. So, let me ask you a question. Do you know the original reason why the door is opened at our Seders around the time we refer to Eliyahu, right? We say, everyone please rise, we open the front door, and we say, Eliyahu ha-Navi, right? Then somebody kicks the table to make the wine shake so the kids think somebody's there, right? I learned exactly what you learned. The reason is we want to symbolically welcome Elijah, demonstrating our love of peace and our hope for the future. It's a wonderful interpretation. I teach it all the time. It's not the real reason. It's not the original reason. The original reason is this. Right before we welcome Elijah, in the Haggadah, we recite verses from the book of Psalms, pleading with God to pour out his wrath on those who have persecuted, tormented, and literally murdered the Jewish people. We ask God to bring judgment down upon them. The door was opened. Ready? The door was opened to make sure that none of the Gentile authorities were outside listening in, hearing us call out to our God to punish those who had so mistreated the Jewish people, because it could lead to more pogroms, more suffering, more death. Here's one more. You all do apple and honey on Rosh Hashanah, right? It's pretty universal. Honey is sweetness, apples are newness. Since the fall is a traditional time for apple harvest. But a lesser-known custom, which has become increasingly popular in recent years, is this. We say blessings over a variety of fruits and vegetables, each one being a pun on the Hebrew word. So here's an example. You hold up a date. A date. A date in Hebrew is tamar. It's a beautiful Hebrew name, tamar. It means a date. And then we say, sheyitamu sonenu, which means, may our enemies perish. There are positive blessings, but overall the pattern and the theme of most of the blessings that we recite on Rosh Hashanah with those fruits and vegetables is a plea that God will annul the plans of those who seek to destroy us. So the reality is we have lived as Jews for centuries and centuries, expressing a hope that enemies that plot harm to Jews should fail in their efforts. That's the norm in Jewish history. Throughout our Jewish history, it could have been said by almost any Jewish community, anywhere in the world, but, and this is the proverbial but, not in America. At least that's how we grew up. America was the big exception. This was the place we could focus on apples and honey, sweetness and hope, not on worrying about attacks on us, not opening the door to see if somebody was listening in who wished us harm. No American Jew opening the door to welcome Elijah ever worried that there was someone out there wishing us harm, that they would be listening so they could accuse us the next day of calling upon our God to harm those who harm us. In fact, it's the opposite in America. We invite them, the non-Jew, the Gentile, to join us at the Passover Seder, to join us for the experience. It's an amazing thing. We invite them, we give them a piece of celery to dip in the salt water. That's the hors d'oeuvres, right? Then we give them a piece of bread that you can't even swallow because it's so dry. And we talk for 1 hour before we give them any food. And this is what we invite them to. And the crazy thing is they love it. It's a great evening for them. But now we are watching specials on anti-Semitism in America. Now we are experiencing rampant anti-Zionism on the campuses we send our kids to, and hearing of attacks, some violent, some have even been murderous, on certain Jewish institutions. Orthodox Jews, dressed in their garb, are randomly attacked in Brooklyn, not even to be robbed, just to inflict bodily harm on a regular basis now. So we're nervous and confused and anxious about the future. How do we cope with this new reality? Not new reality for the Jewish people, but new reality for the American Jewish community. How do we respond? One of the reasons I think we are still not sure how to respond is that there is a new phenomenon, unknown in the past. You see, in past generations, there was no debate, no dissension, no disagreement among Jewish leaders or the Jewish people as to how to define and determine who our enemies were. They knew what an anti-Semite was, but today we're so divided that we can't even agree on what constitutes anti-Semitism. The left only recognizes anti-Semitism when it emanates from the right, and the right only sees anti-Semitism when it emanates from the left, neither willing to criticize and point out and call out the anti-Semites in their own midst. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance realized that people weren't even clear on what was anti-Semitic and what wasn't. And they decided to build an international consensus. They came up with a working definition that diverse parties could agree upon, a definition that would give policymakers around the world the tools to identify the problem. So why is that so important? Here's an example. Let's say you have a state in our country that has a policy which says, we do not do business with any company that expresses anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist beliefs or has anti-Zionist or anti-Semitic policies. Now, if BDS is defined as an anti-Semitic act, as it is in this universal definition, then the governor of that state can, according to American policy, boycott and sanction that very company that's trying to boycott Israel. If it's not called anti-Semitism, there's nothing they could do about it. They would have to give them a chance to do business with the state like anyone else. Now, the good news is, over 30 nations, including the United States, the European Union, and a number of NGOs, academic institutions, many local governments, many municipalities around the world have accepted this definition. The bad news is that some have refused to accept it. Why? Because it cites as an example in the definition of anti-Semitism the following. I quote, drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of Nazis, denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. That is considered anti-Semitism in this new definition. And that's why some countries and some groups wouldn't sign. They don't accept it. For them, comparing Israel to Nazi Germany and saying it's a racist endeavor isn't anti-Semitic. As you can imagine, many of the Arab countries were uncomfortable with that definition, so they didn't sign on. And then there are some Nazi sympathizers in Eastern Europe opposed to it. No surprises there. Zebras don't change their stripes. But here's the problem. Here's the shocker. Objecting to including BDS and the denial of the right of the very existence of a Jewish state. I'm not talking about boundaries. Just the idea of a Jewish state in that part of the world we call Israel or Palestine, objecting to that was a coalition of groups known as the Progressive Jewish Alliance. They objected. It's okay to say Israel has no right to exist as a Jewish state and you're not an anti-Semite. Who's in that group? Americans for Peace Now, the New Israel Front, Teruah, Rabbis for Human Rights, and a few other groups that claim to represent Jewish values. Denying the Jewish people a right to a Jewish state in our historical homeland has somehow become a Jewish value for certain Jewish groups in America. Some groups claimed they were concerned that the adoption of this definition would undermine freedom of expression and suppress criticism of Israel. It's nonsense and they know it. The definition explicitly states criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any other country is not anti-Semitism. In other words, if Israel is singled out for criticism, but other states guilty of the same or even worse offenses are not, then that criticism is anti-Semitic. It's not based on principle or conscience, it's based on Jew hatred. I can assure you that there is one thing we don't have to worry about. It is that there isn't enough criticism of Israel, or that debate over Israel's policy might be stifled. It will never be stifled. We debate it among ourselves. As my colleague and friend, Rabbi Stuart Weinblatt, wrote, rejecting this international definition of anti-Semitism is comparable to a person drowning in the ocean, refusing to accept the life preserver because they don't like the small print on the inside lining of the flotation device. So here's the truth, a truth we must understand ourselves, a truth we must repeat over and over again without any hesitation, without retreat. There is no difference whatsoever, no difference whatsoever between anti-Semitism and the denial of Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, between anti-Semitism and Jewish statehood. Classical anti-Semitism denied the equal right of Jews as citizens. They said we couldn't be citizens in those countries. They took away our citizenship. That's the first thing the Nazis did. Took away German citizenship from the Jews. Today, anti-Zionism denies the equal rights of the Jewish people to its lawful sovereignty within the community of nations. Both are discrimination against Jews. When it comes to the United Nations or Yale University Council students or the California Teachers Union or NYU professors or Columbia professors, we're upset, we're outraged, we're appalled, but we're not surprised. It's what we expect. But when it comes from organizations populated by Jews, claiming to want to do right by the Jewish people, or from 100 rabbinical students who signed a petition objecting to Israel taking measures to defend and protect her citizens, when hundreds of missiles were being launched from Gaza at Israel's population, Arab and Jewish, and then to accuse Israel of violent oppression of human rights is something we just never expected to see. Houston, we have a problem. Something has gone terribly wrong. The 11-day conflict the other summer between Israel and Hamas unleashed a torrent of cries. Death to the Jews. There were attacks on Jews. There were attacks on Jewish institutions. Even places of businesses owned or associated with Jews around the world. There were desecrations of synagogues and Jewish cemeteries, because again, here's the truth. Those who hate Israel do not make a distinction between Jews and the Jewish state. Russia attacked Ukraine. Were there any calls for violence at Russian Orthodox churches? Of course not. No one would even think of making the connection between Russian Orthodox churches and what the state of Russia does. It doesn't exist. But for Jews in Israel, it does exist. The seat of anti-Zionism, ground zero now, for denying Israel's right to protect herself or even exist as a Jewish state is the American university campus. Not all of them, probably not even most of them, but too many of them, and some of the most important universities, not only in our country, in the world. Our eldest Miami granddaughter, Diane Segi's oldest, our third, Amit, is in 11th grade. She'll be applying for schools next year. What is she going to encounter when she ends up on a university? Maybe nothing. Some universities are apolitical. They're just worried about the football game. But other universities are very political, and their Jewish students are being ostracized, being kicked out of organizations, being threatened because they are Zionist. And the universities are not taking the anti-Semitism on their campuses seriously. A Stanford University town hall was Zoom-bombed with racist and anti-Semitic messages and images. They were equal opportunity offenders. They used the N-word to insult the blacks in the room, and they used swastikas to terrify the Jews. Yet the University Diversity Committee, in its report, omitted all reference to any anti-Semitic aspects of the attack, of the incident, focusing exclusively on the racist part of it. There are always anti-Zionists who ask, why do you need a state? You're a religion. You're not a people. That's anti-Semitic in and of itself, because they dare to try and determine who we are. We have been a nation since the moment God entered into a covenant with Abraham and Sarah. We are Am Yisrael. We're the people of Israel. We're not Dat Yisrael. We're not the religion of Israel. We're the people of Israel. We are the people who lived on the land of Israel before any current nation even came into existence on the face of this earth. Or if they do accept that we are a nation, they want to know, well, why Israel? Why Palestine? Why not someplace else? The great Zionist leader and the first president of Israel was Chaim Weizmann. And he was once asked this question: why do you Jews insist on Palestine? There are so many undeveloped countries you can settle in much more conveniently. And Weizmann responded with this: that's like asking you why you drove 20 miles to visit your mother last Sunday when there are so many other nice Jewish ladies living on your street. Because Israel's our home, that's the answer. She's our mother. That's why we went there. Anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism go hand in hand. They are two sides of the same coin. Yes, they're the anti-Semites who hate us because we're different. We control banks, the stock market, the media, you know the whole story. That kind of anti-Semite, which comes mainly from the uneducated, the afraid, the insecure, particularly from the far right, from the white nationalist, the white supremacist, the neo-Nazis, it's been around for a long time, probably be around for a long time to come. But the real threat is from the anti-Zionism, which has made it possible for good old-fashioned anti-Semitism to raise its ugly head in polite and educated circles. The result of anti-Semitism being accepted in universities and in the most respected newspapers is that the uneducated and poorly adjusted believe they now have the support of university professors and campuses and anonymous groups on the dark web. They don't believe there will be any consequences to their actions. Of the hundreds of hate crimes committed against Jews in New York City since 2018, hundreds, many of them documented right there on camera, only one perpetrator, one single perpetrator has served even 1 day in prison. That's not the fault of the police. They arrest them. It's the fault of the DAs and the politicians who have somehow reached the conclusion that persecuting such anti-Semitic acts will just lead to more of them, so leave it alone. That's upside down. Punishing them for what they are, hate crimes, That will slow down the surge. The country is not anti-Semitic, not even close. But there are anti-Semites, just as there are racists, and there's homophobes, and there's misogynists in America. And in every country on the face of the earth that's populated by human beings. Because there are always human beings who are racist and anti-Semitic, or anti-Catholic, or anti-the other. But we are not a racist, homophobic, misogynist country. And through education, over generations, those human prejudices and vices can be shrunk and diminished. But our first obligation is to control it. And that can only be done by a society that has a no-tolerance position on racism and on anti-Semitism and on misogyny and on homophobia. No tolerance. People ask, what can we do about this rise in anti-Semitism? How do we even begin? The first thing is we make sure our institutions are secured. That's our number one obligation. That's called triage. That's what we have to do right now. It's common sense. On the battlefield, the first thing you do is you stop the bleeding. Then, after we secure our homes, and our synagogues, our JCCs, our institutions, then we push for no tolerance for hate crimes, for severe punishments to set an example, to make it clear, as it once was, it is unacceptable in the 21st century to speak anti-Semitic or any forms of hatred. In fact, it was unacceptable for decades after the Holocaust, but that was before anti-Zionism was promoted by the far-left progressives and white nationalists on the extreme right. Far right, far left, Jews lose. We only win when we're in the center. We need to demand greater accountability from colleges, which are now ground zero for anti-Zionism in this country. A high percentage of Jews attend universities, the highest percentage of any group in America. We must demand, just as the black community has correctly and boldly demanded, that we will not accept that our children are subjected to vicious verbal assaults or prejudice, or that they can be punished or isolated for just being Zionist. A Zionist is not the one who supports everything any particular Israeli government does. A Zionist is one who believes in the existence of a Jewish state in Palestine and works to make that state as safe and as good as it possibly could be. Israel is the nation that has risen out of the ashes of the Holocaust. It's the nation that rushes to send humanitarian aid around the entire world when natural disaster strikes. They were the first to come from a foreign nation to try and help in Surfside when the Champlain Towers tragically collapsed and stole so many beautiful souls from us. Israel is a country that rescues those rejected by every other nation, taking in over 800,000 Jews from Arab countries, 100,000 Ethiopian Jews who are facing annihilation, and 1 million Jews from the former Soviet Union, where living as a Jew was essentially a crime. She is the startup nation who shares her medical and technological discoveries with the whole world. And here's an historic truth. Everywhere we have lived throughout this world, we Jews have contributed disproportionately to better the lot, not just of the Jews, but for all people. This is the story we need to tell. This is the story our kids need to hear. This is the story we need to boldly be proud of. Perhaps the best known Soviet dissident, Anatoly Natan Sharansky, who grew up in the Ukraine and is, like so many people, been fixated on the tragedy unfolding there. He has many friends in the Ukraine and family. And this is what he said at a recent gathering in Israel. When I was growing up, Natan said, in Ukraine, in the city of Donetsk, we've heard a lot about Donetsk recently, there were many nations and many nationalities. There were those with identity papers that read Russian, Ukrainian, Georgian. This was not important, since there was not much difference between any of them. The single designation that stood out, Sharansky said, was Žid, Jew. If that was written on your identity papers, it was as if you had a disease. We knew nothing about Judaism, Sharansky said. There was nothing significant about our Jewish identity other than the anti-Semitism, the hatred, and the discriminatory treatment we experienced because we were Jews. When it came to a university application, for example, he said, no one tried to change their designation from Russian to Ukrainian. It didn't matter. But if you could change your designation of Jew, it improved your chances of university admission 100-fold. This week, Sharansky continued, I was reminded of those days when I saw thousands of people standing at the borders of Ukraine trying to escape. They're standing there day and night, and there's one word that can help them get out immediately. They just have to say, Jew. I am a Jew. Because if you are a Jew, Sharansky says, there are Jews outside who care about you and are waiting for you. There is someone on the other side of the border who's searching for you. Your chances of leaving are excellent. Boy, the world has changed, Sharansky said. When I was a child, Jew was an unfortunate designation. No one envied us. But today on the Ukrainian border, identifying as a Jew is a most fortunate circumstance. It describes those who have a place to go, where their family, an entire nation, is waiting for them on the other side in Israel. Only because there is a Jewish state can a Jew anywhere in the world say, Ich bin Ayid, Ani Yehudi, I am a Jew, and that will be their ticket to safety, not discrimination, not hatred, not a death camp. To deny the Jewish people that fundamental right of all peoples, of all nations, to have their own nation is the highest form of anti-Semitism in the world today, because it doesn't threaten one or two institutions, not a group of Jews in a particular city, but it threatens the entire Jewish people everywhere. Finally, I go back to a famous quote by Golda Meir. If Israel were to lay down her arms, there would be no more Israel. If the Palestinians were to lay down their arms, there would be peace immediately. We talked about all that fruit eaten on Rosh Hashanah by Jews around the world, with prayers that the plots of our enemies will be annulled. So our hope, our goal, our task is to reach a day when we can just say the blessings that ask not to annul the decrees of our enemies, but to ask that we will be fruitful and that we will be prosperous and that we will be able to continue to contribute to the betterment of all humanity, and that our merits and our mitzvot will be multiplied like the seeds of the rimon, the pomegranate. And may we then be able to enjoy, along with all nations, with all races, the fruits of peace and security, so that the vision of the prophets may come to pass. Lo yisagoy el goy cherev. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation. Humankind will not conduct war anymore, and none shall be afraid. And to this we can all say, Amen and Shana Tova Umetuka.